Hello there. It's Broadcasting Scotland at 7, and it is the 26th of June 2019. Very nice, warm, pleasant day outside today with beautiful blue skies. But yesterday evening, we went down to Sauchiehall Street in Glasgow because we wanted to talk to people who were homeless. And we looked around and we met some people. And one of the big stories today in the news has been the homelessness statistics. Now, Kevin Stewart said, in a country where with some of the strongest rights in the world, it is unacceptable for anyone to find themselves without a home. Our Ending Homelessness Together action plan sets out a range of measures that support our ambition to eradicate rough sleeping, transform temporary accommodation, and end homelessness altogether. Now, I'm sure that you've heard that the Scottish Government rolled out a plan for housing first. Now, this is an issue that touches many people. It might not be you, it might be one of your friends. It's certainly easy to happen. I mean, it's happened to me. And I know that our guest, Gary Patterson, has some first-hand experience of this issue too. Now, it's a big subject. And as I say, we found some people in the street in Glasgow last evening who were handing out and helping people who are homeless, a great group of people, young people, which was wonderful to see. But here is my guest, Gary Patterson. Some of you will remember him from a few days ago. Very informed young man. And so tackling this incredible problem, we're tackling this challenge in the context of the UK government's welfare cuts, which we know are causing major hardship, housing insecurity for many people. A growing number of studies show that these cuts are causing homelessness. We are spending more than £125 million this year to mitigate against the worst impacts and protect those on low incomes, including £62 million worth of discretionary housing payments. So Gary, I've said quite a lot. I'm sure you've got a lot to tell us.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to say is perhaps start on the positive, and that is that the strategy in relation to building more affordable housing does appear to be working, in the sense that the number of people that are being put into housing from homelessness is increasing, and that is a positive statistic. But I think today Shelter are right to highlight this issue, that this is a huge issue that needs to be addressed, that the statistics are not going in the right direction yet, that we'd like to see. It's good to see that the Scottish Government has embraced policies like Housing First, and for people that don't know what Housing First is, we talked about it a little bit last time, but that's where you are placed into housing where there's a kind of wraparound support, and that the housing is taken on a human rights basis. I think that's really important as well, the right to be housed, that is a human right. So the numbers really we do need to see like a bit of strengthening, I think, in terms of the activity that's been done around homelessness.
You see, it does actually say here, local authorities have a statutory duty to provide temporary accommodation. We are concerned to understand why the data suggests that this is not always happening. That's what...
So there's a practice that's known as gatekeeping, and my experience, I think it's not uncommon. It can happen, and it can seem to happen quite regularly. And this is where the point of contact services for homelessness provision, where they try to avoid placing people into some form of homelessness accommodation, and if that's not if there's no stock available, the local authority has a legal obligation to house those individuals in a bed and breakfast or something similar. But we do see examples, and it's not just been in the last few years. Like I said before, I've been involved in the NUS. I was an activist. I was vice president of a student union. I've helped many students go through the homelessness provision, and I've found that they've had difficulty accessing that support, and they need really a lot of assistance from organisations like Shelter, who have to almost threaten sometimes local authorities to say this person is being supported, and it shouldn't have to be that way.
Do students have particular problems when the university's on a break, like a summer holiday or something like that?
Sure. Well, that's where my own personal background comes from this. Unfortunately, when I moved down here to Glasgow, I wasn't entirely prepared for what that move would mean, being like an independent student. And over that first year at university, I really struggled to get any form of work. And when it came around to the summer, I actually found myself, being made homeless from university accommodation. And for that whole summer, I was having to, couch surf. So I found that when I went to the job centre, I got told, well, you're a student, so you can't get any help. You should go back to your parents, even though that's not always an option for people. And, even trying to go to a food bank, I got told we don't help students. So I find it interesting that today one of the main activists from Shelter, who's, I think quite bravely highlighted her story, she is a student as well. And this thing about the gap in summer provision, that's where it shows that this is not just about housing, it's not just about social care, it crosses so many different areas, and like student support is one area around this.
One of the things that I noticed last evening was that when we went out, there weren't many people kind of sitting in the street and with a cup. Now, there were a couple, and there was a guy playing his guitar, but I think that's a different issue. That's a busker. But the thing was that when these guys came up with their yellow vests on, and with all this trolley with the bits of food and the pizza and the donuts and stuff they had, and cups of coffee and various bits of clothing, a T-shirt they had, the folk who they targeted, and they obviously knew who to look at, but they were people that you would actually just pass in the street. You wouldn't know that they were necessarily homeless. In fact, a guy turned up on a bicycle. Well, why shouldn't he have a bicycle if he's got no home? He should have at least something. But there was one guy in a shop doorway, and you would not know if you just glanced, like you do at most strangers walking through the street, that he was homeless. So it seemed to me that there was quite a lot of hidden homelessness within the streets of Glasgow.
100%. I think if you are to speak to people that work in the field of homelessness, or if you speak to people that are experiencing homelessness, or even just look at the statistics out there, a huge issue is the UK government's really incompassionate welfare system. We've been living now under 10 years of austerity in this country, and that's really bit in. So some of the case studies that we've seen around this are examples of people really struggling with issues like housing benefit. That's where we're at a disadvantage as a country alongside other countries, and what we can do to tackle homelessness. The Scottish Government's doing, I think, quite a lot of great work around housing programmes like Housing First, the strategy that was taken in over the Christmas period to try and help rough sleepers. But we need, as you hear from calls from the sector, we need a cross-sectoral response, and that has to be along things like reforming the benefit system so that it actually supports people rather than put them into homelessness. And of course, yes, one of the main issues that actually will cause homelessness is still the dysfunctional housing provision that we have in this country, and that's after decades of mismanagement of the housing stocks with the Right to Buy, which took so much social housing out of public hands. And there's been a lot of great work done by the government in that as well over the last 10 years to actually start rebuilding our housing stock. So we're starting to see the positive kind of impact of that work, but it's still clear that there's so much more work to do. I think Shelter are right to highlight the issue, and I would like to see more of an acceleration towards the Housing First model, which is based on a human rights approach to housing, which has support from health, mental health, funding, a whole wraparound support provision. That's really important.
How does it all fit? You're looking at Scotland from a slightly wider perspective. I don't know how far you can go. Are you on the European level, maybe? I don't know if you can do it on a worldwide. No, maybe worldwide's going a bit too far because there's such a diverse lot of people in the world and they all live in different ways.
Yeah.
But from a European perspective, how does it look? Are the Scottish Government working harder or less harder, or where does it go from that?
As someone that has been homeless and then has got involved in activism kind of throughout that, I worked with an organisation called Fianza, and they are like the cross-European body that deals with homelessness, and we see that there is a lot of homelessness issues throughout Europe. Ireland, for example, has some significant issues, and a lot of that's tied into the property market being so bloated, and it's really difficult for people to actually access housing. So the Housing First model, that is something that's been pioneered across Europe, and the Scottish Government, much like policies like the baby box, are looking at those examples and trying to bring them into Scotland. And I think it really has to be stressed as well that a lot of it's come from the homelessness sector itself, from the grassroots up, and that the government is working with them to deliver those services. One other thing, before we kind of go off on this as well, I think another area that's worth mentioning is that Women's Aid had said today as well that one of the leading causes of homelessness is domestic violence and abuse as well. And that, I think, just shows you that the lack of availability of affordable social housing, despite the great work that's been done to build on that, shows that it's still challenging to access immediate housing support. And I've also got a friend who was recently just homeless, and they were not someone who was accessing benefits because they were actually in a position, they were working. So it wasn't that they were homeless through some sort of poverty issue. When they tried to access the support provision, they found that the cost of accommodation, when not provided by benefits under the City Council's homelessness provision, it was nearly half of his salary. So that's a huge issue that needs to be addressed as well. It's not always just about a poverty issue.
So I wanted to go on with that a little bit. Yeah. Something else like this, but the thing I wanted you to say, is the Scottish Government doing its best? I mean, in comparison to other governments around Europe?
I'd say I don't think that there's many governments that are doing more on this issue. I think the Scottish Government is definitely leading within the UK for sure. And I think it's one of the leading in Europe in terms of the adoption of Housing First as a principle, about taking a human rights approach to homelessness. And I think it's really encouraging as well that the ministers said today that whilst we are still putting people into bed and breakfast options because we can't have people sleeping rough, that the word that was used was that that's unsuitable. So it's extremely encouraging that the Scottish Government recognises that there needs to be work done in this area, and that's taken forward quite an ambitious programme. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on it. What we really need is the UK Government to also work in concert with the Scottish Government, so that it's not just about innovative housing approaches that are delivered, but it's also about the benefit system actually working to help people. That's what it's there for. It's called social security for a reason, and that side of the system is not working at the moment, so it's becoming extremely hard to deliver effective support. And we see Scotland is still got a lot of work to do, but in comparison to the rest of the UK, we're ahead by a big degree.
Yeah. Now, going back to what you're saying about the women's thing a few moments ago, now it's so easy, isn't it, to fall out of your family situation, a row, a divorce, and maybe a man takes in another woman or a woman takes in another man, and the whole thing falls apart overnight. Now, not everybody has a bank account that's full of money. In fact, I'd probably guarantee that more people have less money than have more money. So if you get chucked out of your place where you were living because some domestic arrangement falls apart and you haven't got resources, I mean, just to rent an accommodation, you've got to give a deposit, you've got to give references, you've got to give blah, blah, blah. It's a whole heap of stuff. I mean, it's no surprise that people actually find themselves on the street, is it?
Again, like if you were to become homeless tomorrow, it's very unlikely that you're going to pick up a private flat within a day. It's even more unlikely that you're going to pick up social housing because there's such high demand for it. So, inevitably, you either will go to a hotel, or if that's not an option to you, you're going to have to go to the homelessness provision. And as I'd mentioned earlier on, that it's not always people who are in, economic poverty. And we could have scenarios where there's people who are, they're working under limited wages, but not enough to access social support. And the housing provision, certainly at least in Glasgow, it doesn't appear to be very accessible. So the homelessness provision doesn't appear to be very accessible for people who might be in that camp. Someone who ends up having to spend half of their income to get by in that as well. The other thing as well, that we've got rising housing prices in our main cities in Scotland as well, and that's something that the work around improving the tenants' rights in relation to their ability to stay in their property, and the government has talked about some form of rent controls in high pressure areas. These commitments and these policy deliveries, these will contribute to supporting less people falling into homelessness. So there's no one single issue, there's no one single cause, there's no one single silver bullet either, but it's very clear that what the sector are calling for is to tackle the benefit system not supporting people. It's to really embrace Housing First as a project, and then it is to call on the government to do what it can to step up these provisions and move faster if possible.
Let's do one last point on this, because we've spoken about it for quite some time now. I'm not going to speak about the person that I'm thinking of at the minute, but I met a man and I thought to myself when I was speaking to him, I wonder how this person would cope with going to an office, asking for help, if he could fill in the forms, if he could actually, I don't know if he could even write. I've got no idea, of course, but he struck me as being a man who might find all of that pretty difficult and pretty like looking up at a mountain you've got to climb. I mean, is the profession to help people to access this thing? Is all the amounts of money that are offered in help, is it taken up? Are there many people who should get benefits but don't get them for whatever reason? Maybe they don't want to accept it because they're too proud. I don't know if that exists still. It certainly did exist when I was a younger man. Yeah. I mean, what about that side of it? And we'll finish that with that.
There's always going to be people that are really hard to reach in any welfare provision system. There will be, a small number of people who are difficult to engage with, and I think there's a big role there for the charitable organisations that work with them. Give a good example here of in Glasgow, the City Council works on a basis of referral as well when they're engaging with individuals that are known to them on the street. There was recently a policy that was taken forward by the SNP government here in the City Council to refer people onto those kind of services and to try to find people like on kind of face to face on the street and identify how they can be supported. So I think that's the right approach, and I'd like to see again like more of a kind of embracing of the Housing First model and try to accelerate as much as possible the movement towards Housing First across the country.
And a slight postscript. I mean, if you're a person who's had to leave a house because of whatever, and you haven't got much money, but you still own the house, part of it, but you can't live in it, there's not much help for that either, is there?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it just goes to show you that there is no one basic example that it can happen to so many different people, and there really needs to be as much support opportunity as possible, so it does capture the people that don't fall into what the traditional understanding of homelessness actually is. Well,
thanks for all that, Gary. Let's move on to our next subject for this evening, which is immigration. Now, we had a report last week, was it, or the week before? Serco were going to change the locks on refugees accommodation, and of course that kind of ties in with what we've just been talking about. But immigration is such a big issue, and it's been so become so toxic because of Mrs May's hostile environment, and that's been carried on by Amber Rudd. And of course, immigration is not something that's subject to the Scottish government because it's an issue that the Westminster people look out for. Lots of call for that to become a subject of the Scottish Parliament rather than the Westminster Parliament, obviously because we need more people to come and populate us here in Scotland. But Stuart McDonald's been speaking on this today. The Tory government's record on immigration has been utterly shameful, and Mrs May's legacy, as she has pushed out of office, will be stained by the hostile environment she helped to create and inflict upon communities. The toxic go-home vans, children denied British citizenship because of outrageous fees, to couples being split apart, the Tories having simply failed families and vulnerable people. It is time for the UK government to draw a line under the dismal decade of toxic Tory immigration policies. So there was an opposition debate, day debate in Parliament today down in Westminster, and I mean, it's another subject which is so very harmful to many. There was an issue of a man who came with he was a Scotsman, came with his wife, and because she was from a different nationality, she got put in Dungarvan for a while. So, come on, let's have a bit from you, Gary.
Yeah, well, it's funny because that does segue from the homelessness issue as well, because I just seen a statistic today that it said 4 to 5 out of 10 homelessness issues down in Birmingham and in Manchester of recent issues have been related to refugees and immigration issues. And I think that highlights further the kind of discompassionate system that we have under the UK government's approach to migration. There's been so many examples of people who have come here to Scotland to, make their life here. They want to contribute to our country. They want to be part of our communities. And in many cases, they have been here for some time, and they have been, welcomed parts of our community, contributing, and then they find themselves being removed often down out of Scotland because of the additional support that they can get here on things like legal aid, which they've tried to restrict down south. So, we've had examples of this where we had students who have been removed from their properties at late times at night. They've been taken away from their family and friend network down south, and then they are taken to these detention centres, which, I've had the unfortunate, chance of visiting one of those centres because I was involved in helping a student who was facing such a deportation, and I was shocked to find that those centres, they operate with less rights than a prison. I was not allowed to take in a pen and paper, for example. I was not allowed to bring my phone in when I was speaking to that student, and the people that I've seen in that centre, there was examples of young guys who were, have lived 90% of their life in this country, and they're being removed to a country that they have absolutely no connection with, and they don't know how they're going to survive there. So I think that the whole system is just entirely uncompassionate, and it's something that really needs to be reformed. We look internationally, there are examples, for example, Canada. Different regions of Canada are able to take on, a different immigration policy if they want. This has been something that's been, asked for a long time from the Scottish Government. It's something that makes sense because we need to build our economy here in Scotland. We need more people to come and support that growth. We have more of a kind of welcoming attitude when it comes to this issue as well. But the UK government has been so obsessed with the headline figure that actually to the detriment of things like the higher education sector, where we're putting up barriers to students coming to study because we want to make the UK wants to make the immigration numbers look a little bit better. It's another probably example, just like Brexit, where we're pursuing a damaging policy just to make the Tories look a little bit better in government. Yeah,
and of course I suppose we should maybe just touch slightly, not too long, but on Mr. Trump, because he's having an issue with immigration on his Mexican border, and there's this big issue about separating children from their parents and the conditions that those children are being kept in.
It's absolutely horrific. I seen an image today of a father and his daughter, who had drowned, and this is just another example of the same kind of politics at play in a different part of the world. The children that are being held in these detention centres away from their family, I'm surprised that it's still occurring. I really would think that it's not legal, but there's huge question marks there. But it's definitely there's no compassion at all.
And that's the point, isn't it? The compassion that we really do need, because we cannot live without each other. In this day and age, we need to be maybe a little bit nicer to one another. I say that often. But the last bit of what Stuart McDonald said today was whoever takes the keys of Downing Street next month must wake up to the reality that a hostile approach to immigration will put off talented people from across the world coming to live and work and contribute in the UK. It will hit our economy, and it will harm our business sector, vital public services. It is harmful to people and communities. That is a price that Scotland must not pay and will not pay.
You can understand why EU citizens from the other 27 member states are concerned about losing their rights, because they look at the UK government and they've seen the approach that they've taken to people from the rest of the world, and they're obviously really concerned about being held under the same process and the same kind of desire to drive down numbers just to placate certain members of the extreme sections of the Tory party. So that's why as well the campaign around stopping Brexit is so pivotal, because we're going to see people that we have in our family, our friends, people that we work and study alongside, much like people from the rest of the world as well, but of a higher percentage, people from Europe, that they're going to be suffering under that same risk from the UK government, and that's something that really needs to be stood against with everything we've got.
Yeah, because you see, I say this often too, numbers are tricksy things, aren't they? Because it may be a 10% decrease in something for the government, but that's 150,000, 500,000 people whose lives have just been altered irrevocably for the rest of their duration. And people, anyway, I'm sorry, but tonight there's another heavy subject here. Maybe we should have a little intermission and a little song for something, but this is a very sad thing that we have to talk about, another issue, and that's the suicide statistics. Now, suicide's a thing that many people contemplate, I suppose, when they come to a point in their life where they can't see a future. Indeed, on my way to Broadcasting Scotland a few weeks ago, I saw a man climbing over a railing on the busy main road on the bridge above, and it did give me quite a shock. And I know that it's touched many people. It's a very sensitive issue, and we must be very careful how we talk about it, because we don't know if anyone watching is having some difficulties around this issue tonight. It certainly hit my family. So Claire Hockey says that any suicide is a tragedy, and my heartfelt condolences go out to the friends and families of those who've been affected by the loss of a loved one. An increase in deaths by suicide last year is concerning and is sadly reflected in other parts of the world too. We remain committed to building an overall 19% decrease in suicide rates in Scotland between 2004 and 2008 and in 2014-2018. Alongside mental health and suicide prevention groups, we are working to raise public awareness and improve crisis support services for those at-risk groups. To take this important work forward, we have established a national suicide prevention leadership group.
Just to start as well is to say, if there are anyone that is watching that does feel any kind of issues with this, do not feel afraid to reach out for support. It is there for you. It's non-judgmental. So call Samaritans or whatever. There is information online that you can get from that. But the main thing to say, from this is obviously it's an extremely tough issue. The work that the government's doing, I think is really important, that they need to target those groups that, I think they said a particular age demographic of men in particular, of 35 to 44. It's clear that there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done in this area, and we are seeing, coming through schools and through young people as well, that there's increased mental health, mental health challenges as well, and that the support provision for mental health services, it really does need to go, much further if it can, and I think as well within colleges, universities, and actually schools as well. This is a huge issue, and something that really needs to be taken, with as much kind of seriousness and focus as possible.
Yeah, see, to my mind, these three stories fit one after the other into the same glove in a way. It all comes down to how much do we care about our fellows. I mean, how much pressure do you put on someone before they would resort to such an act of violence upon themselves?
There is a lot of commonality between the three issues, and what they all show a need for is a compassionate society, a society that wants to help people, accessible support provision. So it's, if people need help, they know that they can pick up the phone and that there's someone at the other side that wants to help and that is also able to help. And I think the kind of the third side of that as well is it's about the kind of multi-service approach, that wraparound approach, so that whatever number of services you engage with, so if you're someone who's engaged with a homelessness service, for example, but we can spot that there are needs for you to access like mental health provision, that you're not sent back to the bottom of another chain and have to climb up again, but that actually we have a linked up approach through all of our services. And I think that's why it's really important that the Scottish Government does have its social security agency now, which is based in Dundee and here in Glasgow, and that we can design a compassionate social security system. Of course, we only have the minority of powers on that, and that really has to be our call as well, to say that we need to expand that provision that's there. But in terms of the services that we do deliver, and that's everything from the services we talked about, like homelessness, but also on our campuses and in our schools, that our support provision is accessible to people. And we do see still examples of people who have to wait months for help, and they can come and say that they have suicidal thoughts, for example, or they're living with really difficult mental health challenges, that they can wait a long time to get help, and that's something that really needs to be looked at in general. Again, it's not just an issue in Scotland, that's something that's general across Europe and beyond as well. So we need to try and bring commonality together in all of our services, make sure that they're linked up, and make sure that people know that if they're not feeling if they're feeling down, or if they need someone to speak to, that they know that they can talk to friends, that they can reach out to support services. So that's really the focus that we need.
Yeah, and of course we've talked about these three very heavy issues, but thankfully a vast majority of people manage to get from day to day, and they manage to have somewhere to live, and they manage to eat. And I suppose one of the things that we should do is make sure that we're all right and we can manage, and then give the excess to other people who can't quite manage the situation. But I suppose it's down to all of us to make sure that we care about each other a little bit more, and just keep an eye on all those people about us, and hopefully we get to a better world. Now, we're going to change the subject. Now, this could be a slightly more fun item, I suppose, because of course it's Boris Johnson, and what's not fun about Boris? But this is an issue though too, because apparently it's been reported in several different media outlets today that after the incident with Boris Johnson and his girlfriend, and then Boris decided not to report upon that to anybody, even though he was asked questions. And then there was a picture that was kind of leaked of him and his girlfriend sitting in around a table in some grassy nook somewhere or another. And then there was, discussion of whether it was an old photograph or a new photograph. But the point is that this argument that his neighbours reported to the police and the police came round to investigate. Now it seems, from what we've been led to believe by these media outlets, that these people have come under criticism and have had to move out of their home for fear of reprisal, or I don't know exactly what that was. It's only a story that came up when we were sitting in the green room a few minutes ago. Have you got any comment on that, Gary?
Well, I think some of the response in some sectors to, in some parts of the political discussion, which seems to be predominantly down south, suggesting that it's politically motivated. I think that's a real issue, because we shouldn't be discouraging people from reporting any issues that they think might be related to domestic violence. And to see, thankfully the names are former ministers, but to see some really antiquated Tory politicians, like I seen an interview on Sky News in particular, where they said, this is like, I think Rees-Mogg called it curtain twitching, and it's kind of trying to diminish the role that we all have in society to protect people from domestic abuse. We've seen that statistic earlier on today. It's the leading cause of homelessness. So I'm.
And there's me saying to you, we should be looking out for our neighbours and caring for one another. And surely, if these neighbours of Mr. Johnson thought there was something terrible going on, if it had been something terrible, and that the woman had been harmed, or indeed if she was hitting Boris, who knows what the situation was. But if someone had come to harm and that neighbour had not reported it to the police, that would have again been a huge issue, wouldn't it?
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, if there's any suspicion of there being domestic violence, then, people are right to highlight that and to, have the authorities look into it. And I think there's, the response has just been hugely disappointing, but I think it shows the really toxic nature of political discourse, predominantly down south around Brexit at the moment, whereby if someone believes in the thing that you believe in, they're amazing and wonderful, and they could do no wrong. And if someone that believes in something that you don't believe in, well, of course, the villain. And what's happening is down south on this particular issue and others is that people are being judged on actions against the status of what their position is within a particular debate or party. If there is any issue of domestic violence or of domestic abuse, that's something that needs to be looked at. And the whole political perspective of people involved and whether or not they'll remain or leave, that shouldn't really come into the question at all.
And there's also an issue of where the story is. Now, it's always a good ploy, isn't it, to put people's minds in another direction. If you don't want to see, like the magician, he doesn't want to see you looking at the right hand, so he moves the left hand, so your eyes follow that. And certain of these stories are like that, aren't they? You can get the press wound up on this story, and they miss the other bit.
Yeah, well, again, all I could say is basically what I've said before. I think we shouldn't be belittling people for highlighting issues which may involve domestic abuse. It's an important issue. It shouldn't be politicised.
Okay, so now at the SNP conference a few weeks ago, Nicola Sturgeon announced that there would be citizens' assemblies. Now, this is something new, and of course people will question what it is and how it is and why it is, because they will say, as somebody actually at the conference said, why do we need this? We've already got that. But Mike Russell's been speaking about that today, the Constitutional Affairs and Brexit Secretary for Scotland, and Mike has said this: it is important that the Assembly is clearly seen to be independent when reflecting on the debate that Scotland needs. The Parliament is rightly proud of the first 20 years of our reconvened existence, but democracy does not stand still. We have to keep innovating in order to keep moving. When we see in the Brexit issue a complete breakdown in trust between politicians and people, surely it should inspire us, all of us, no matter our political allegiance, to find new ways to bring politicians and people together to resolve the deep-seated division. Now, these assemblies will be made up of members of about 100 members of the public. They're not necessarily going to be politicians or people, just ordinary people who live their everyday lives, and they will receive a benefit. They will get a thank you gift of £200 every weekend that they commit to this. Let's say it's a community service, isn't it? Really, it's a service for us, and so these assemblies will be set to talk to one another and bring out some ideas. Can you give us a bit more insight into these citizens' assemblies?
Sure. I think it's a really interesting proposal. There's been good examples, particularly in Ireland, which I think has been one of the main inspirations
for it. That was the abortion issue, which of course is a very hot potato there.
Really difficult issues, and trying to bring together different perspectives from a debate for a bit of knowledge exchange, of course, for people to kind of learn about the issues, but also to hear from people who may be for or against a particular topic, for them to outline, what their kind of reasons are for that, and to try and learn from that engagement, and to try to build a policy perspective around their their feedback, really. So some of the names that have been associated with it so far are I think, hugely positive. David Martin, for example, has been suggested that he would chair or co-chair the assembly. And David Martin is recently an MEP. He lost his seat, one of the Labour MEPs. He is someone who has said through the Brexit process that he wouldn't necessarily be against independence, that he could be convinced on it. But he's got significant questions and concerns, and that is someone who's a quite widely respected figure across Scottish politics, particularly in the last few months, as people have kind of seen certain contributions that he's made as longest serving MEP for Scotland, and I think that's a good example of him chairing it and reaching out, hopefully, to people from a completely different side of the argument, and to try and actually get into a room and really sit down and find out what people's kind of concerns are, what their ideas are, reach out to a new audience that wouldn't necessarily engage with an independence activist on the doorstep, but brought into this more kind of neutral environment in which they can outline what their specific concerns are. I think that's going to be a hugely positive learning experience for our movement and for the government, of course, and hopefully it will also help to generate some new ideas, generate some new kind of style of engagement for us as well, so that we can really engage better with the people that are maybe not yet convinced on independence.
Yeah, we'll have to look forward to seeing what they come up with. Anyway, the Assembly will meet on 6 weekends in the late autumn and to spring in 2020. And there's going to be a dedicated website containing information about Citizens Assembly and its work. So I'm sure if you put that into a search engine, you'll find out any more you want to about that. Now, there's a nice story, I think, to maybe come to the almost the end of our broadcast today. This is that today the Scottish Government announced that there would be the Scottish Child Payment. Now this is going to be a brand new benefit. It'll provide eligible families with £10 a week for every child under 16. With the introduction for under 6s starting by early 2021. And they deliver all the remaining eligible families with children under 16 by the end of 2022. I mean, sometimes you think about these dates, you think it was a long time away, but actually the time does go by pretty quickly, doesn't it? When delivered this in full, this will encompass 410,000 children, the estimate would lift 30,000 children out of relative poverty by 2023-24. Now, of course, the Scottish Government often put under pressure in the First Minister's questions about this particular issue, and it's not an issue that's only Scotland. This is an issue that continues over the whole of the UK government, whole of the UK, and it's a lot of it's down to the welfare cuts and the austerity programme of the Westminster government. Give us a little bit about that, please, Gary.
Yes, I mean, it's clearly a positive development. Again, it's when you take this into consideration with all the other policies that are starting to come through the social security organisation, things like the Best Start grants. It's shown you what we can really do when we have more control over welfare powers. What we really need is more control over the financial tools behind that as well, so that we could really do so much more for our country in terms of creating a really well-funded, compassionate care system. We've got the beginnings of a compassionate social security system in Scotland, but it's still tied to a kind of Barnett formula system that is facing significant pressure from Westminster austerity over the last 10 years. There's no doubt that this funding is going to have a huge impact on families who are struggling to get by, and I think the government should be extremely commended for taking forward this work, which will make such a great impact.
And actually, it's another step in mitigating that terrible two-child policy known as the rape clause.
There's so much money that's unfortunately wasted that could be otherwise used towards creating more support like this, and that's funding that is mitigation. So the Scottish Government mitigates so much money in relation to the bedroom tax, and that's a social security system shouldn't be there to plug holes that are created intentionally by a government down in London. It should be there to try and identify what parts of society could really benefit from additional support, and to really get out there and target that to them. So I think it's a really great policy. It will have a huge impact on families that are struggling to get by, and again, it's a real key demonstration of what we can do when we've got the power to take forward the power and funding to take forward a compassionate social security system here for the people in Scotland.
So Naomi Eisenstadt, the First Minister's former independent advisor on poverty and inequality, said, "The best way to help children out of poverty is to get money into parents' pockets. So I'm absolutely delighted that the Scottish Government is introducing the Scottish Child Payment." So that's a nice way to end our discussion this evening, Gary. I thank you very much for your insight. And for those people who've been kindly, if you have been watching, thank you very much for that. And Gary's come here totally at his own expense without any fee to be paid because, well, frankly, we haven't got any money to pay him. Neither have I been paid or anybody in the back room, because we really do want this to be the television station of choice in the future. But of course, it costs money to do everything, and someone to put the captions up would cost us an awful lot of money, because I was now Joanna Cherry, which was a very delightful idea. But if you could go to our website and have a look, you'll find in the middle of the menu bar, sort of just down from the logo, there's a button in the middle that says Donate. And you can put a little donation there if you like, or a big donation would be even better. If you go to the end thing, you can register, and there you can sponsor for £5 a month. And if you do that, then that would help us pay the bills here in in the middle of Glasgow and help keep us on the air. So I hope you think that we're valuable enough. We'd like to bring you entertainment programs. We'd like to bring you more people to entertain and inform you. But we can only do that with with a few more pennies. That's like everybody, isn't it? But I know it's tough for you probably too, and I know people who've talked to me about that, and they give what they can, and I know that you will if you can. So thanks very much for watching Broadcasting Scotland this evening. Thank you very much to Gary Patterson again. Thank you for the people back in the back room out there, and we'll be back again. I think possibly it's Thursday tomorrow, is that right? And I think possibly that is Gordon Ross's evening. So look out for Gordon, and hopefully we'll be back next week with some more Broadcasting Scotland at 7. Bye-bye.